Great to have you, everyone. Thanks once again for being with us. My name is Josef Lensch. I'm the founder and CEO of the Political Tech Summit and Partisan. So it's great to have you with us in this webinar tonight. We talk about how D66 came back again, which already tells you something about the story that we are exploring tonight. Just some few householding things. First of all, as always, this is being recorded so that if you need to leave earlier or if somebody cannot make it, they will be able to watch the recording later on. Also, of course, you have the opportunity to ask questions. You can either post questions, comments, thoughts in the chat, which is open, or you can also use the Q&A button down there in the bottom field. So at any point, please feel free to come in. I'll try to bring you and your questions, your comments, your thoughts into the discussion at any point, so don't wait for the end. And of course, we will be ending certainly on time tonight. So we have 60 minutes. Should we have discussed everything before 60 minutes, then we don't need to spend the full time, but I'm sure we have lots of interesting things to discuss because, as many of you will be aware, just a few months ago, the Dutch Social Liberal Party, D66, was at 6%. In the polls, and now I just checked it today, the political poll of polls, it's 19%, a whopping 90%. I think, Afke, this is probably the best result or best poll.
It was,
ever.
also the election result. It was the best result of D66 in the history of the party since 1966.
Wow, so that's quite the story. And I'm really glad that Afke, you took time out of, well, I'm sure what must be a manic schedule right now, negotiating and being in the machinery of kind of making the government happen. So perhaps you can share some stuff around this as well. But of course, we are really interested in how this actually came about. First of all, let me introduce you. Dr. Afke Groen is a political scientist and the director of the Hans van Mierlo Stichting, which is a liberal think tank in the Netherlands. She has a background in European politics, party organization, democratic innovation. She's built a reputation for combining academic insight with strategic and real-world application. She worked previously in research and leadership roles across academia and politics. And at the Hans van Mierlo Stichting, she leads the Institute's intellectual agenda, shaping long-term political strategy, fostering internal reflection, and advancing liberal democratic ideas in the Netherlands and Europe. A warm welcome to you, Afke.
Thank you so much for those very kind words and fantastic introduction.
No, we're really glad to have you. So, as I already mentioned in the title, it's not the first time that D66 came back, but it's actually at least the second time, certainly that I know of, first time being in 2006. So perhaps you can kind of bring us into the scene. Not everyone will be familiar with Dutch politics. So perhaps you can set the scene for us and give us a bit of an overview of the journey that D66 and the ups and downs that you've experienced over time. And then, of course, I have quite a few questions because I think it's super, super interesting. And again, please feel free also in the audience to participate. But for now, over to you. The floor is yours, Afke.
Thank you. Yes, I will tell you a little bit about this history because I do think that the context of the loss of the elections in 2023, when D66 lost 15 seats from 24 to 9, was actually quite different from the loss of the elections in 2006, when D66 only had 3 seats left. And you also asked me to tell the audience a little bit about the internal evaluation that we did. So if you will allow me, I will also share some of the conclusions that we drew from the experience of the electoral loss in 2023. And indeed, there are also in the report, I actually printed it. It's not very climate friendly, but I did. It's called It's Up to Us. But in the report, we quoted some of the conclusions of an older report back in 2007 about the elections of 2006, because there were many differences, but also some similarities in the longer term patterns. So Well, thanks again for having me here, and a good afternoon to everyone who's listening. Um, the Meester Hans van Mierlo Foundation is the independent think tank of D66. So I do want to emphasize from the start that I'm not here as a campaigner. I'm not a political spokesperson. I'm not a commentator on day-to-day politics, but my role and the role of the foundation is really to help the party think, ask uncomfortable questions like we did in this evaluation, and to offer some tools, intellectual tools for renewal. So in 2023, as I mentioned, D66 lost 15 seats in the national elections from 24 to just 9. And as the announcement of the webinar already stated, and as Joseph mentioned, and I appreciate the way he formulated it, so let me quote it. The loss of these elections gave rise to a clear-eyed, courageous internal review of what had gone wrong and why. And perhaps that formulation is too much honor, but I do think that it was courageous because looking into the mirror, it hurts. Nobody enjoys looking into the mirror, but well, if you want to improve, you cannot afford not looking into the mirror. So that's how we got here. And I do want to give credit where it's due. And that's the party leader of D66, Rob Jetten. He created the space after the electoral laws in 2023 to do this internal evaluation. And he didn't ask for some kind of polished story. He asked for a real critical analysis, and that's the space that we used. And when I say we, I mean my co-author, Anneliese Oosthorn, and myself. And I definitely also want to give credit to Anneliese. Important to mention, this was a joint effort of the parliamentary group and the think tank, so the political foundation. So we were in this together, which was important also for the conclusions to really have an impact. So Joseph already mentioned that this kind of self-reflection has a history within D66. So in 2007, there was also an evaluation after the electoral laws suffered in 2006. Back to only 3 seats in parliament. Back then it was called Ready for the Climb, so ready to go up again. And that's actually exactly what D66 did. And that's so in 2006, there had been 12 years of electoral losses, of electoral defeats. While in 2023, it was the first electoral defeat after electoral gains, so every election since 2006, D66 had won more seats. So the context was really quite different. This was just the first electoral loss suffered in a longer period of time, but it was a harsh one back to those 9 seats. So the context was quite different. But back then in 2006, the think tank also helped to rebuild the party by asking some of the difficult questions. And as I already mentioned, some of the conclusions of the older report, we literally quoted it in the 2024 evaluation because it had become relevant again. And the most important example of this is the difficulty of maintaining profile while you are in government and the risks of becoming ideologically ambivalent. Also important to mention when you compare 2023 to 2006, the 2023 elections really radically changed the political landscape. So some of you might live in countries where the extreme right had already been the largest or one of the largest party for a very, very long time. Well, in the Netherlands, one of the larger parties, this was definitely the case. But the 2023 election, for the first time, the extreme right really won the elections. became the largest party, the Party for Freedom, PVV by Geert Wilders. At the same time, the progressive bloc as a whole lost 20 seats in total. They became smaller than ever in 100 years. So this was the context of the 2023 elections, and this was also part of the shock. It was not just the loss suffered by D66, but also this progressive bloc becoming so much smaller. So that's the context that gave rise to doing this evaluation, looking in the mirror. And to do this evaluation, we conducted interviews, extensive interviews with people inside, outside the party. We did round tables. I mean, I'm a political scientist, so I invited other political scientists at round table events. We analyzed voter data, membership dynamics, and we also reviewed scientific literature, because I'm really glad that there is an emerging literature on, well, the literature on the extreme right is a bit older already, but there's also an emerging literature on better understanding what you can do, what progressive parties can do against it. We deliberately focused in the report not on individual blame, but on the more systematic patterns. So as we wrote in the report, this is not a factual account. Politics is a human endeavor, and we formulate observations at the level of the party as a whole. And this was really important to be very clear about. So that's why I like to repeat that here as well. So what I want to do before we engage in a conversation is to give you a bit of an idea of what this report was actually about and what our conclusions were. And I'll focus on those conclusions that I think are relevant more beyond the Netherlands as well. So without getting into the nitty-gritty details of the party politics, internal party politics within D66. So in total, let me count them. There were 8 conclusions, and I briefly want to take you through them. So the first conclusion that we drew was that there had been a mismatch between expectations raised in the election campaign and actual delivery after the election. So in 2021, D66 ran on a campaign with a promise of new leadership, which created hope and also a historic victory, gaining 24 seats. But it also created, we concluded, inflated expectations. So strategic voters, they came, but they evaporated just as quickly after the elections because government realities became messy. D66 entered the same government as it had done previously, and disappointment was correspondingly large. So that's a broader problem. The promises that parties make during election campaigns can definitely come back to haunt them. So a mismatch between expectations raised and actual delivery after the elections. And I think that's a warning for the current formation process of a new government. So something to definitely also keep in mind. So the second conclusion, and that was one that we could literally copy from the report about the 2006 elections, was about a loss of ideological profile. And that's definitely also not unique to D66, because any progressive party that governs with more conservative partners, they face a similar dilemma. So do you join the government because you want to advance your policies, knowing that it might blur your identity or how your identity is perceived by voters? Or do you stay in opposition to preserve ideological profile and clarity? So the 2006 report about the 2006 elections, it already described this dilemma, and it resurfaced almost literally. So we literally quoted the old report. If you join a cabinet, you shouldn't be indecisive. We gave of too much of the impression that we were in the cabinet, but we didn't really feel at home there. So this was literally exactly the case again, about, 15 years later. So that was conclusion number 2. Governing led to a loss of ideological profile. And the third one was about the collapse of the agenda-setting power of progressives. It's the extreme right that dominates the debate. And again, I think the Dutch case illustrates a broader pattern across Europe. When cultural issues dominate the political agenda, we see that right-wing parties generally thrive because the majority of people, at least in the Netherlands, but I think it's the same in several European countries, is, when it comes to cultural issues, more conservative. But when socio-economic concerns lead the debate, progressive parties generally do better. Yet over the past 20, 30 years, I think progressive parties in the Netherlands, amongst which D66, have lost their grip on this agenda. So cultural issues dominated the agenda, and right-wing, extreme right, managed successfully to dominate the political agenda. So we documented how migration became the central theme of the 2023 campaign, and progressive parties lost control over the narrative. So conclusion number 4 was that there was too much fight over what the actual truth is, so over facts, and too little fight, or by fight I mean political conflict, over values. And I think that's a pattern we also see more broadly in 2 academics called Christopher Bickerton and Carlo Invernecci Accetti. They have also invented a word for it called technopopulism. Which means that today, the political debate is not so much ideological, but it rather seems to be a fight between technocratic arguments and populist arguments. So in conflict with false claims of populist parties, mainstream parties, progressive parties like D66, they often respond with their own claims to the truth. So one example of this in the Netherlands, and especially in those 2023 elections, is what number of refugees gets priority for social housing. So the right-wing, extreme right would say, there is a housing crisis, and it's all because of the refugees, because they are getting priority to social housing, and that's why Dutch people are left behind. And then D66 would explain that this is actually 5 to 8%. So coming up with the facts, but that doesn't respond to the underlying emotions that the populists invoke. So this is an unsuccessful way. When you do this, you won't actually win the debate. So, of course, we're a social liberal, progressive liberal party. We love facts, expertise, reports, data, but well, in the report we note when politics becomes a technical competition over the truth, you leave the field open to populists who offer more emotional clarity. And you pretend that there's actually no alternative to your policies. And when people feel there's no alternative to the status quo, it's very uncomfortable to them. So conclusion number 4 was we focus too much in our political conflicts on truth and not as much on values as we should have done. So conclusion number 5, and I'll do this a bit quicker because the final ones are more about internal party politics, and it's connected, was that ultimately this led to a lack of a hopeful, value-driven, own perspective. We had solutions, but we had fewer stories. And voters need to have a sense of where you want to take the country. What is the future that you are fighting for? And not just what is the status quo that you are managing today. Lack of a hopeful, values-driven perspective. And I think that those are the most important conclusions that are also relevant, perhaps, for liberal movements, progressive liberal movements across Europe. And of course, we had a number of findings also related to the party organization, similar as the 2007 report about the 2006 elections. These were related to integrity issues, untapped talent across the party, and also the internal debate or the lack of internal debate. So internal debate really lost its place within the party, and that was also quite similar to 2000, the conclusions of 2007. So then what? We didn't just do the evaluations and good luck. So we did formulate some advice. And at the time, we formulated 3 missions for party renewal of D66. And I'll mention them very briefly, and we can definitely discuss them further. And they might sound obvious, but it was important to write these down. The first mission was make the progressive story lead again. I almost want to say great again. But actually that's what I mean. No? It's reground yourself in your ideological tradition. Choose a focused set of themes where you offer leadership and speak from values and people's lived experience, and do this consistently to make the progressive story great again. I actually like this expression. Mission 2 was make the party organization, I'm going to use a word that I don't really like as much, but make it agile, make it so the context in which we operate is very volatile. So make sure that your organization can adjust to this constantly changing context. So reinvest in the internal debate, reinvest in intellectual party life, simplify rules, procedures, but also strengthen the engagement of your party members and your responsiveness to your party members and also party supporters more broadly. And the final mission was put people first, members, volunteers, politicians, because politics has really become harsh. People burn out, safety risks increase. So we advised a cultural shift, putting people first, supporting each other, leadership development, things like these. So after finishing our evaluation, there was a lot of fuss in the national media within the party. But as I mentioned before, the support by the party leadership, especially by Rob Jetten, was absolutely crucial. And we continued our work to formulate advice, and perhaps we can discuss that in a bit more detail. I'll leave that for the conversation with you, Joseph, because I think I've already been talking way too much. But I think together, I hope this gives you a bit of an idea of how a progressive party in 2025 can look into the mirror, rebuild its narrative, its organization, and also its connection with society. So thanks again, and back to you.
Thanks a lot, Afke. Fantastic, and so much to unpack in there. Perhaps let's start with the role of the review. So you've been talking about the the necessity to look into the mirror with clarity,
Yeah.
also pulling no punches, while of course at the same time trying to focus on the systemic issues and not kind of shifting personal blame, right?
No. Yeah.
Now of course there are 2 sides to this. There's the internal public, and there's the external public. So perhaps
Mhm.
can you give a little bit of an insight? How was this presented to the internal public, and how was this also received? So was this contentious, or
Mm-hmm.
did everybody say yes, everything is fine?
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, kind of how important do you see this kind of more public facing self-criticism? So basically saying publicly,
Yeah.
we were wrong, we learned from this, so, and how do you balance those two things? Do you first go to the internal public and then you go to the external public? So can you give us a little bit
Mm-hmm.
of the sequencing of that?
Yeah. Yes, that's a very good question, um, well, perhaps I start with the sequencing of this because I think it's important to understand as a context. So, mandated by the party leadership and Robieta in particular, we wrote the internal evaluation. And well, we offered it to him, saying, here is our advice. Here are the conclusions, and here's our advice." And he mandated the publication of it, so it became public just ahead of a national party congress. So the party congress was in April, and it was the first party congress after the electoral defeat. And well, that's it shows how fast we operated. So the elections had been in November, 22nd of November. The party congress was in April, and by then we had already published the report both internally to the own party members. It was available on the website, and it was also made public. So it was in the national media already. So I remember very vividly that I was preparing my presentation of the report on the stage at the National Party Congress. And I ultimately concluded that I didn't have to repeat the conclusions because they were all over the news. So I decided to look forward rather than I also made a joke about it, I think, saying, well, if new publications of the political foundation get as much attention as this one, we are very happy. So it was so both internal audience and external audience at the same time. I'm still very happy and encouraged by the way that it was received internally. So I do feel very encouraged about this, and I also felt that way at the time. Of course, it's a bit scary to write up conclusions like these because they were quite strong. But and as I said, it's always painful to look into the mirror and to see no one likes to do that. So it's always a bit painful. But I find it really courageous how both party leadership and members responded to these conclusions. And still today, it's 2025, 2 years later, the report is very often discussed. So, both nationally and at local level, the conclusions of the report are still discussed, and I also discuss them broadly by local chapters of the party, inviting us to talk about these conclusions. Externally, also still today, they have been very important also in the election campaign because they are, if you convincingly want to show that you have renewed your party, you also need to publicly show that you have looked into the mirror. I mean, it was not, and you have to really do so and show that you've taken the time to do so and to be convincing. And that's exactly what we did. So when Robiette or other party leaders said in the media, well, we've learned from past experience, that's true. It's actually what we did. So it's your leverage to start doing things differently. So still today they play a role in media analyses of how D66 came back after the defeat in 2023.
Thank you. And we have our first comments and questions in the chat. Thank you for that. David Chalmers, hello to the UK, has commented that what you've been saying mirrors very much their own journey in the Lib Dems. So thank you very much for contributing that. And of course, the Lib Dems are another very interesting case study in
Yeah,
constantly reinventing oneself
yeah.
time after time. And there's a question from Jan. Did the report lead to better self-reflection, evaluation of local party sections regarding organizations, etc.? I know from back in the day in 2006 that this also was an issue, the question of centralization and decentralization. So perhaps can you also give a few insights into how was this perceived, conceived in the local sections, and have there been any organizational changes there as well?
Mhm. Well, I think if I compare so on the one hand, yes, we also advise some organizational changes, especially to organize the internal debate in a better way. So to make this more bubbly, to make internal debate cool, because and this is still something that is part of the broader strategy also of party leadership. But I think more important than the organizational change has been a change of mindset. So what I notice when I go around the country to talk about the report, but also I mean, it's important to look into the mirror, but it's also important to look into the future. So what do you want to do? So the other advice we wrote later on was called freedom is action. So we need to act. And more important is the result I find more important is a change of mindset. So I've really engaged in many, many interesting discussions with our party members or local politicians about stop being entrenched, how to stop being entrenched in these fights about facts, truth, details, these very, very harsh debates that are often about futile issues. And how to conduct politics based on your values, how to appeal not just to the mind and the head, but to the heart, how to reconnect with people's lived experiences. So more important than the organizational change, I feel, is this change of attitude and mindset. And of course, this change of attitude and mindset implies some organizational changes or has also inspired organizational changes. So one of those organizational changes is that we did in the 2025 election campaign, so very recently, August, September this year, a regional tour across the Netherlands. It was called the Netherlands Tour. So Rob Jette, I made a map for him showing where support for D66 was actually lowest. And Rob Jetten has invested time and energy to go to these places and understand what's going on, understand the lived experiences. And this is something, again, I have to give credit to other people because this is something that we learned from Progressive Slovakia, and their experience, and how they organized these tours. So there's also an example of transnational learning between parties in the European Union. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Great. Yeah, I spoke back in the day to an Irish representative who also did such a tour, and he said you have to let people scream at you. So
Yeah,
it's often
yeah.
uncomfortable, right? Sitting down and listening to the concerns and of course also some of the disappointed people that have not gotten into mandates and who didn't kind of perform as they would have expected, and of course then potentially blame the HQ for that.
Mhm.
There's another question in the chat. whether the evaluation or the subsequent actions have actually led to a change in the demographic makeup of D66. Have you actually tried that? Was it one of your objectives? And
Mhm.
if so, how kind of are you performing in that regard?
Yeah, it's a good question, and to be honest, I cannot answer it yet. And that's because I took a little break after the elections, and I didn't check the detailed data on this. We do know that in the 2021 elections, there was built around the promise of new leadership. D66 also had a historic victory, gaining 24 seats with Sigrid Kaag. And we did compare that to the 2023 elections and the demographic makeup of the people who voted for us. The biggest difference was that we lost the women. So we lost women to probably other progressive parties, and I would be really curious to find out if they came back, or maybe it's appealing more to younger people, the campaign, because there was also major investments into social media, but I don't know yet. So I can't answer I'm very curious to find out. I can't answer it yet. What perhaps is interesting to stress. Um, well, in advance, before the elections, I'm concerned about the entire progressive bloc because, as I mentioned, in 2023, the progressive bloc was smaller than it had ever been in 100 years, and I'm seriously concerned about this. So I was a bit afraid that if D66 has a major electoral victory, that this would be the result of a major electoral decline of the Greens, Labour, of other progressive parties. And yes, the Greens, Labour have lost seats in the elections. However, I think it was I have to check, but I think it was four seats to us, and we lost one seat to them, or it was five or and four, but something in terms of these numbers. And we gained seats from many different people who voted for many different political parties in the last elections, including the Conservative Liberals, the VVD, but also including two seats from people who voted for the PVV, the extreme right, in the last election. So, given that the PVV also had 26 seats, and we also had 26 seats, I'm very happy about those to see this. So it is for a long time we thought it was impossible to appeal to the electoral base of the extreme right, but this gives a little bit of hope that it is actually possible to do this. And we, as progressive movement as a whole, we have to, if we want to turn the tide of the extreme right, we also have to appeal to the voter base that the extreme right has today. And I think that this shows that that is actually possible.
Thank you. I also want to look at the role of the Stichting as
Yeah.
a kind of an independent but aligned think tank that then gets the mandate to do this review, right? So many political parties have think tanks or foundations in their universe. So how do you kind of how important do you see this nature that you are aligned, you have a kind of an internal facing dimension, but then of course you also are independent and have an also external facing like a
Yeah.
both side dimension. How do you deal with the ambivalence of kind of basically looking to both sides, and what would you potentially also suggest to other parties and their think tanks? What because apparently you've done something right. So what would be the conclusion to other foundations and think tanks like that?
Yeah. Well, I'm often asked this question, and the answer is I love this ambivalence. Um, we enjoy being in this ambivalence. It's an asset, I think. So I mean, of course, it can be complicated, but but being in the position of being a critical friend to the political party that you hold dear. I hold social liberalism very dear. It's important to me. So being in a position of critically advising the political party D66 from its own tradition, starting from its own tradition. Why? Okay, so why were we founded in the first place? Can you so remember? So they're all in this. I remember in this room next door, there is a very big image. I think you've seen it, Joseph, of the people who started the movement of D66, as it was a movement, Democrats D66, with their appeal to people who were concerned about democracy. So I remember pointing at this to Rob, saying, "You are in this tradition, remember." So it's nice to be. We really enjoy it, although at times, of course, it can be a bit difficult because, no, I've said it before, no one likes to look into the mirror, be confronted about or be asked critical questions when everything seems to go really well. But so my um, it- it's it's so important to have space for critique within your political party. It's and in institutions like political foundations or like the way we are organized, they can help you also institutionalize this. So it's not just, I'm not just saying this because my name is Afke and I did a PhD in political science. I'm doing this because I'm the director of the think tank. It's my role. It's my organizational or institutional role that is also safeguarded by our own a board. So we're not part, the party board is not the board of the think tank, but it has a separate board. It's safeguarded by the Dutch law, which provides funding directly to the think tanks. So we're not dependent financially on D66. So we can also make our own agenda. Of course, always in close cooperation, but I love being in this balancing critique and support. It's the ambivalence is enjoyable and important, I feel.
Thank you. I want to use the last 15 minutes to dive into the campaign. We already had a question of Felipe in the Q&A, kind of what other liberal parties can learn from
Yeah.
it. Now, there's the saying, there's in the campaign, there's candidate before message, before, tech and tools and everything else. And I want to look at all three aspects quickly. So can you give us some idea how important was actually Rob as a candidate, as somebody who performed well in the debates, as somebody who kind of embodies this kind of young, dynamic, good-looking person, has charisma. How decisive was he individually, you think?
Um, well, as an academic, um, I think it's too early to really tell what made this campaign really successful. I think you need some distance to make a proper analysis. So, as an academic, my answer would be ask me again next year, because then we can really say what happened.
We have to do a follow-up then.
Yeah, we will. But I think the most important aspect has been that well, you mentioned candidate message tools, and I think the most important is that this was aligned during the election campaign, and it was aligned around a message, a positive message. So rather than one, so the conclusions of the previous report were also we failed to provide some kind of hopeful idea about the future to people. We were defending status quo using facts, expertise, etc. Well, the status quo doesn't work for people. And it doesn't work for too many people. It works for some people, but for too many people, it doesn't. So I think what was done really, really well was that this was a hopeful perspective, a positive perspective on the future, um, well, echoing the message of yes, we can. So it can be done, heads gone well. It is possible, it can be done, yes, we can. A positive message for the future, while also recognizing the difficulties that we do currently face. So yes, charisma of one person it plays a role, but most important is that the party leader is authentic and message and party leader, they they provide one message and they align.
Thank you. You spoke about the untapped talent.
Yeah.
How did you actually tap into the talent for the campaign? So can you give us a little bit of an insight into the trainings that happened? How did you upskill? How did you capacitate your people? And then of course I also want to talk about the tools, but first about the people. Well, how did you do that?
Yeah, I think this was also so I can tell you about this from the perspective of the think tank. So we always have the goal of doing 66 workshops a year as a running joke, but we actually get there. So the trainings that we do, what we did over the past, because this is a longer term investment, you can't just change it like this when you're starting an election campaign. It's you need if you want a cultural shift or a shift in mindset, it takes years to create this. So in the trainings that we did, we emphasized five main points so for our local politicians, but also the candidates, we're still doing the same, training the candidates for the next elections. And this was start from the lived experiences of people. So when you talk to people, start by referencing or talking about lived experiences, so that it actually shows that you're not out there, some politician out of touch with reality, but that you're in touch. So start from their experiences. And if you want to do that, you have to meet them and talk to people, to grassroots campaigning. Involve people in a hopeful future. I mentioned this several times before. And we also emphasize the future can only be hopeful to people if they can see how they can be a part of it, so how they can participate. So that the future is not, many people feel that the future is something just happening to them, facing a war, facing climate change, but how can they be part of a better future? The third one was conduct politics from your values, stay away from these fights over facts. I know it's tempting in a time of disinformation, but facts appeal to the mind, and politics is in large part emotion as well. Don't get the fourth piece of advice was don't get distracted by the extreme right tipping the debate towards them. So don't get distracted because I often compare it to like these children playing football, and one of them passes the football somewhere and they all run after it. That's sometimes how we behave. So we have the extreme right passing the football somewhere and we all run after it, but that's how they dominate the debate. So don't get distracted. And the final one was be honest about your dilemmas and considerations and changes of minds. I think the report itself was one of the examples. So be open about this. So um, that's the message that we from the think tank, how we train people or local chapters across D66 across the country.
It's quite
And of
impressive
course,
that you
there's
can
a whole
recite those five, by the
infrastructure.
way.
Sorry?
It's quite impressive that you can recite those five by heart.
Well, by now, I did so many trainings.
Very
But
good.
that there's an infrastructure to this. So of course, as a think tank, that's the nice part. We are based also at the party headquarters, so we can also rely on the party infrastructure, their local chapters, their boards of local chapters. We can reach out to them. So the digital infrastructure to do so is also in place and has been improved over the past year.
Thank you. And speaking of digital infrastructure, in the last minutes of our conversation today, I don't know how much you can share about the tools that you worked with, and how far you used AI in your work, and how you went about it. But whatever insights you feel comfortable you can share here, I think would also be interesting to the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, of course, the colleagues from the communication campaign department, they can say a lot more about this. I'm pointing upstairs because that's where they are. But there was a major investment in a new digital infrastructure just this spring. It was a couple of months before the new elections were announced, so the government fell apart, and this did allow us to systematically reach out to the own voter base. It's crucial to rally the base, but also to broaden the base. So to engage people who are perhaps not a member of D66, but are interested in the events that we organize. In the digital, there is a studio up here at the D66 party headquarters. So in the digital meetings that we organize, we could also open them to people who are not a party member. And I think that's important because I can see that D66 is making the change from being being focused on a party that governs. We will still be a party that governs, but also be a movement. And to successfully be both a party in government, but also a broader movement, you need the digital infrastructure to support not just engagement with your your members, but also engagement with your broader voter base. So maybe that was one important takeaway, I believe, from the experience over the last couple of months. Another thing I want to stress is how from my perspective, the the posts and message on social media. Um, so the digital communication was very much, again, I stressed it before, aligned with the message that was on television, with the message that was on that was in the party program. So this was very well done. Also, when it comes to the Nederland tour, the regional tour that Robiata did, it was very well presented also in the digital communication. So the alignment between physical engagement, digital communication, message on television, etc., I think was very well executed. But you're more of an expert than I am, Joseph, on this. But of course, for this, you need the right digital infrastructure as well to allow you to do this.
Final question. So in another conversation, you told me that you wanted to make the manifesto accessible to 80% of
Yeah,
the population,
yeah.
and that you used AI also to help you on
Yeah.
that. So perhaps you can give the audience a bit of an insight how that came about, and how transparent you made that actually.
Yeah. So actually in I don't have it here, but in the back of the party program, there's a brief statement of saying being transparent on how AI was used. And the goal of the party program was indeed to write this in a language that is accessible to 80% of the people. And we indeed did use AI for some for suggestions on this. And I think that could actually be helpful for political parties. So in general, so that's one of the things that we did that's useful. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Afke. Final question from my side, and I know it's still too early, but the role of luck. Luck favors the prepared, of course, and obviously you have been prepared and you've done your review and you've executed you implemented the recommendations. but from your, gut feeling, how important was luck as a factor in this election? Did it have any role also in the success of D66? Was it all, basically according to plan? What would you say?
It's too early to tell. I'm too close to everything that has happened. I had to take a little break to step away from it. There's always luck involved. You can be unlucky and you can be lucky. This is so perhaps I do agree. When you win elections, it's very easy to say, well, it was all prepared and well executed, and this is exactly how we got here, and to the audience, it's exactly how you win elections. That's of course not the case because there is always luck and being unlucky involved, and I think, well, this happened several times, and it's not part of it is you can only control so much. So that's also what I said a couple of years ago, and what I with the previous elections, and what I repeated also with these elections. You never know what happens on the world stage. You never know what happens in internal politics. So I'm sitting here in my office, and just a couple of weeks before, there's a window to my left. It was smashed
Mm.
by a violent protester. So I had to pick up the cobblestones from my desk and from our office. And it was horrible. There was glass everywhere in this room. But Robiette responded to this in a very authentic and clear way. And I think, of course, it has played a role. And I wouldn't call that luck because it was extremely painful and it's very unsafe. But you are always dependent, any election campaign depends on external developments that you cannot control. And sometimes these external developments concern you immediately, but more often they concern other parties or what happens within other parties, or they concern world stage national development. So thank you for pointing out, Joseph, that there was also lots of luck to this.
Thank you very much, Afke. It's been generally great. It's been super insightful. We will make the recording available and also share it in our next week's newsletter with our thousands of followers. So thanks again for taking the time. Good luck for the negotiations. We're very excited to see you progress. And then I'll take up your word that we do a follow-up next year when you have a clearer view of the demographic stuff and everything. But for now, thanks very much, and have a great evening in Den Haag.
Thank you so much for having me.
All the best. Bye bye.
Bye.